April 12, 1944. Normandy airspace, France. The morning sun glinted off the sleek fuselages of Messerschmitt Bf 109s as they streaked across the skies above the French countryside. From their cockpits, the Luftwaffe pilots laughed, voices crackling over radios with derision. Below, the patchwork of green fields, hedgerows and villages seemed peaceful, almost absurd in its serenity. Yet they knew American forces were on the ground. Pathetic, one pilot muttered, rolling his eyes at the sight of tiny trucks and tanks moving like ants along the winding roads. These Americans? They call this an army? The briefing had warned of resistance, of Allied ingenuity, of logistical advantages, but the pilots scoffed. To them, Germany's military machine had proven dominant across Europe. The stories of American industrial might were exaggerated tales, propaganda inflated to explain away previous losses. From high above, the Sherman tanks looked slow, cumbersome, their armor thin compared to the Panther and Tiger tanks that prowled the Eastern Front. They would be easy targets. They would laugh, they would shoot, and the Americans would fall in line like the rest. As they descended, the air was alive with tension. The smell of aviation fuel, ozone, and sweat mingled in the cockpits. Engines roared, instruments rattled. The first Sherman appeared below, a medium tank, its turret slowly turning as if curious about the sky above. The German pilots glanced at each other, smirking. "Look at it," one said. "A tin can on tracks." They dove in formation, expecting a minor skirmish. A victory so easy it would become a tale over German beer halls. But the first rounds fired back were not ordinary. The Sherman's 75mm gun barked in a sharp, controlled rhythm, hitting targets with a precision that surprised even the most seasoned ace. The tanks were faster than expected, maneuvering along uneven terrain with agility that seemed impossible for their weight. Smoke rose from impact points as hedgerows exploded in dust. And suddenly the pilots realized these were not the simple machines they had mocked. The Americans had not only built numbers, they had engineered survival. Circling higher, the German formation attempted to coordinate strafing runs. They counted on air superiority and tactical skill. But below, the Americans had dug foxholes, placed anti-aircraft MGs, and coordinated with spotters in the surrounding villages. Flak erupted in synchronized bursts, shells whistling past wings and fuselage. The pilots' laughter faltered. The Sherman's secret was not only armor but integration, radio, coordination with infantry and artillery, the orchestration of a force that moved in tandem rather than isolation. One pilot, Hauptmann Fritz Keller, broke formation, diving to line up a shot. His target, a Sherman advancing along a slope, turned just in time, the gun elevating and firing. The round exploded against the soft earth, hurling mud into the air. The tank remained unscathed. Keller's eyes widened. He radioed back, They are prepared, faster than they looked." Another pilot added, voice tense, and they hit back. All of them. Every time, the hedgerows that it seemed. Trivial now concealed anti-tank teams, flamethrowers, and mines, ready to punish the overconfident. As the air battle continued, the American ground units demonstrated what raw industrial power and innovation could achieve. More Shermans rolled onto the field, each outfitted with wet ammo storage to prevent catastrophic fire, reinforced tracks for uneven terrain, and crews trained to cooperate with air units. The Germans had underestimated not only the quantity but the quality of the American forces, their ability to adapt, improvise, and survive. For every German strafing run, an American countermeasure emerged, as if the battlefield itself were alive and responding. Below, infantrymen laughed quietly at the pilots' misjudgment, using portable radios to coordinate indirect fire, while Sherman gunners adjusted angles, communicating with spotters over channels the Luftwaffe could not intercept. The German pilots realized the ground war was not a static display, it was dynamic, relentless, intelligent, and it was designed to frustrate their expectations. Fritz Keller's Messerschmitt shuddered as anti-aircraft fire clipped a wing, Smoke spiraled from the engine. He dove, hearts pounding, realizing that laughter had no place here. The American soldiers in there? Tanks had turned what was meant to be a routine sortie into lesson in hubris. Across the valley, Sherman tanks advanced in wedge formations, overlapping fields of fire, coordinating with infantry who used hedgerows as natural barriers. Every step was calculated, every shot measured. This was not chaos. This was industry made flesh. As the day wore on, more German pilots faltered. Some were forced to retreat, engines smoking, hearts racing. Their mocking laughter had died in the cold air of reality. Every Sherman destroyed or avoided was a testament to something larger than brute force. These were men and machines working in unity, backed by an industrial engine so vast it seemed limitless. The Germans' arrogance crumbled under weight of sheer planning, ingenuity, and relentless execution. By late afternoon, the sky above Normandy was littered with smoldering wrecks and retreating aircraft. The once confident Luftwaffe formation had dissolved into scattered groups, nursing damage and pride. Below, Sherman crews radioed reports to command posts, sharing sightings, coordinating artillery, celebrating victories that were not flashy but relentless, cumulative and inescapable. The pilots who had laughed hours before now stared down, pale, shaken. They had mocked an enemy they did not understand, and in that mockery, they had glimpsed the unstoppable force of America's military machine. And in the quiet after the battle, as smoke drifted from craters and the wind carried the scent of gunpowder, one thought lingered in every surviving German pilot's mind: laughter had blinded them. They had underestimated America's ingenuity, its capacity for coordination and its relentless drive. The Sherman tanks were only the beginning. The lesson had been written in steel, fire, and sound, and it would haunt them for the rest of the war. April 13, 1944, Normandy, northern sector. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the bocage, curling around hedgerows and shattered farmhouses like smoke from a forgotten fire. The German pilots had regrouped, nursing pride bruised by the previous day's humiliation. Messerschmitts, still operational, lined the airstrip with engines idling, propellers cutting the chill air. They spoke little, the usual jibes replaced by tense murmurs and clipped orders. Their previous laughter had vanished into the gray mists, replaced by the gnawing realization that the enemy they had mocked possessed a depth of preparation they could barely comprehend. Below, the Americans were already moving. German tanks rolled silently along concealed paths, infantrymen advancing with cautious precision. Every unit seemed to anticipate the Luftwaffe's movements, every commander aware of the previous day's engagement. Artillery observers relayed coordinates via radios to gunners hiding in camouflaged pits. The German pilots diving from above noticed the subtle adjustments, the way the tanks shifted positions not reactively, but preemptively. Each Sherman seemed to move as if guided by a singular mind, a coordinated intelligence the pilots could not penetrate. Outman Fritz Keller led his squadron skyward, engines screaming as the formation gained altitude. This time, they were determined not to underestimate their quarry. The Germans executed intricate maneuvers, attempting to flank the American positions from multiple directions. But the Americans anticipated these tactics. Spotters in tree lines marked flight paths and signaled tank crews, who adjusted turrets with precision. When the Messerschmitts made their first dive, a burst of 75mm fire erupted, shattering earth and sending shrapnel into the sky. One of Keller's wingmen yelped as a shell splinter tore through the fuselage of his plane. The Sherman's secret, hidden under armor and beneath steel, became painfully obvious. Wet ammo storage prevented catastrophic explosions, allowing crews to remain operational under conditions that would have destroyed German tanks instantly. The guns were mounted for speed, capable of firing quickly without losing accuracy. And the crews, trained tirelessly, coordinated with infantry and artillery, forming an intricate web of interlocking defenses that left the Luftwaffe baffled. Every tactic the Germans relied upon seemed met with an answer. Every attack nullified before it could reach its target. As Keller's formation tried to regain control, a new factor emerged: combined arms coordination. American infantry used portable radios to call in Sherman fire on hedgerow junctions, forcing the Messerschmitts to adjust flight paths mid-dive. Anti-aircraft gunners hidden in fields and orchards delivered continuous streams of flak. Explosions scattered soil and shattered glass across the fields. The pilots realized the Americans had turned every natural obstacle into a force multiplier: hedgerows, villages. Even the terrain itself was weaponized through tactical ingenuity. Fritz Keller radioed in frustration. "They move as one," he said, voice tense. "Every tank, every soldier synchronized." Another pilot's reply was barely audible over the roar of engines. "We cannot anticipate them. Not like we can in the East. They think differently." And indeed, that was the stark truth. American military thinking was industrial, analytical, and adaptive. Where Germany relied on technological superiority and tactical doctrine, the Americans relied on scale, integration, and improvisation. One could be destroyed, another would take its place seamlessly. The Luftwaffe tried again, this time coordinating with artillery intelligence, attempting to strike the Sherman column from multiple vectors. But the Americans had learned from the previous engagement. Artillery crews shifted positions. The tanks moved in interlocking wedges. Infantry dug deeper into cover while maintaining visual on the skies. Keller's squadron, previously confident, found itself under fire from directions they had not anticipated. Smoke plumes marked failed strafing attempts, and one Messerschmitt spiraled into the field, engines smoking, leaving its pilot struggling to regain control. By noon, the German pilots' morale had begun to fracture. They were skilled airmen, veterans of countless sorties. Yet they were now confronted by an enemy whose superiority was not flashy or immediate. It was cumulative, relentless, and precise. Sherman tanks advanced in formations that minimized exposure, each one covering the next, each crew communicating constantly. When artillery fell silent for a moment, infantry took initiative, pressing forward through orchards and shallow ravines. The Germans realized that they were no longer fighting men. They were facing a system, a machine of tactical brilliance amplified by industrial might. Fritz Keller's voice, usually calm and commanding, trembled slightly over the radio. This is not what we expected," he muttered. Another pilot, quieter now, admitted, "They're organized beyond belief. We are not laughing at Americans anymore." The words hung in the cockpit air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Above, the blue sky seemed indifferent to the chaos below. The engagement stretched into afternoon. Bombs, shells, and machine gun fire intertwined with the noise of tank engines and infantry shouts. The Sherman crews executed flanking maneuvers with mechanical efficiency, using cover, speed, and teamwork to neutralize the Luftwaffe threat. Every dive, every attempt at strafing, met with counteraction that seemed preordained. Keller's squadron was forced to retreat multiple times, each withdrawal more perilous than the last. By evening, the pilots were scattered, exhausted, and demoralized. On the ground, the Americans paused briefly, surveying the battlefield. Smoke rose from wreckage. Hedgerows were torn but strategically minimized casualties. Infantry checked maps, artillery logged coordinates, and Sherman crews conducted rapid maintenance. There was no celebration, only preparation for the next movement. This relentless, unsentimental efficiency was what had shattered the Luftwaffe's early overconfidence. The German pilots returned to their base at night, wings scorched, engines trembling, hearts heavy. The earlier laughter, the mocking confidence, had been replaced by grim silence. They had witnessed firsthand the lethal combination of American ingenuity, industrial scale, and battlefield coordination. Every preconception about easy victories had been shattered. Every plan, every maneuver now seemed inadequate. The Sherman tanks had revealed not merely a military advantage, but a philosophy of warfare they could neither emulate nor predict. As Keller lay awake in his bunk, listening to the hum of distant engines and the murmurs of other pilots, he could not escape the lesson that the day had taught him. America's dominance was not in a single weapon. pilot, or tactic. It was in the orchestration of men, machines, and strategy. The Sherman's secret firepower was only a part of it. The true shock play and how seamlessly every piece worked together. The laughter of yesterday had been replaced by fear, respect, and an uneasy understanding. Underestimating the Americans was a mistake that could cost lives, victories, and ultimately the war. April 14, 1944, Normandy, nightfall. The sun dipped behind the rolling hills, casting long shadows over the bocage. German pilots, still reeling from the previous day's encounters, prepared for another sortie. The Messerschmitts glinted under the fading light, engines humming like restrained predators. The air was colder, heavy with mist that clung to the hedgerows below. This time the Luftwaffe planned a night operation, believing darkness would restore some advantage. But the Americans had anticipated it. On the ground, Sherman crews readied themselves for nocturnal movement. Spotlights were mounted on high positions. Searchlights were tested and arced across the terrain. Infantrymen equipped themselves with flares and radio-linked coordination, ready to call artillery as shadows moved overhead. For the German pilots, the night promised concealment. But as soon as they climbed into formation, they realized the Americans had redefined night warfare. Radar and early warning systems detected altitude, speed, and vectors. Anti-aircraft crews trained to respond instantly were already poised. Hauptmann Fritz Keller led the first dive. The Messerschmitts pierced the darkness, engines screaming into the night. Below, the Shermans glided forward with headlights off, guided only by pre-planned routes, subtle terrain markers, and signals from infantry observers. As the pilots approached, tracer rounds erupted like sparks in the mist. The Germans tried evasive maneuvers, banking sharply, but every movement seemed anticipated. Shermans turned smoothly, their turrets sweeping in sync with the anti-aircraft fire, a choreography that left Keller gasping. The Luftwaffe's initial confidence began to fracture immediately. One pilot, attempting a dive on a Sherman positioned near a farm, found his target gone, replaced by a concealed anti-aircraft team. Flak shredded his wing, forcing him to spiral upward, smoke trailing behind. Another pilot attempted a strafing run along the main road, only to trigger a coordinated response. Sherman fire, infantry suppressive fire, and artillery that had triangulated his position from multiple sources. The sky itself seemed rigged against them. Heller radioed, voice tight. "They know every move. They anticipate us." His wingman, eyes wide, admitted the same. "It's impossible. How can they see everything?" The truth settled over the squadron like a heavy fog. The Americans had combined air, armor, and infantry into a single, seamless force. Every Sherman, every soldier, every artillery placement was part of a living, breathing machine. The German pilots had mocked this army hours ago. Now they were hunted by it. As the night deepened, fatigue and fear set in. Messerschmitts darted and looped, trying to regain control of the air. Explosions punctuated the darkness as flak met propeller and fuselage. Smoke spiraled, mingling with the fog, creating a surreal battlefield where visibility was limited and every shadow could conceal lethal intent. Sherman tanks advanced under cover, their movements precise despite low light. Crews remained calm, executing drill after drill that neutralized German attacks with minimal exposure. Fritz Keller witnessed a Sherman execute a full pivot on uneven terrain, repositioning its gun toward its wingman in a single fluid motion. The coordination defied expectation. Even the most experienced Luftwaffe ace could not reconcile the speed and accuracy. Anti-aircraft fire converged at the perfect instant, leaving no safe corridor. Pilots began to panic, splitting formation in confusion. A cascade of tracer fire and explosions tore through the night. By midnight, several Messerschmitts had been forced down or damaged. Keller himself felt the vibration of shrapnel grazing his wing, a cold reminder of mortal danger. Below, American commanders observed the engagement with clinical precision. Lieutenant Colonel Matthews, directing German movements from a hilltop, noted each German tactic, countering with synchronized maneuvers. "Adjust wedge 3 degrees left," he instructed. "Flank the eastern hedgerow. Keep overlapping fields of fire. The tanks responded instantly. Their engines' low hums in the dark. Infantry radioed confirmations. The integration of forces was seamless. There was no hesitation, no surprise. The Germans' assumptions were systematically dismantled. By early morning, Keller's squadron was decimated. Smoke hung low over the fields. Twisted wreckage littered the hedgerows, and scattered Messerschmitts limped back to base. The pilots had entered the night with confidence and mocking laughter. They returned broken, shamed, and exhausted. Every plan had been anticipated, every angle covered. The Sherman's secret firepower was no longer just armor or ammunition. It was the embodiment of American military philosophy, relentless, adaptive, and integrated. In the aftermath, the surviving pilots gathered in silence. The usual banter and bravado were absent. Keller, staring at maps of the engagement, muttered quietly, almost to himself. "We underestimated them. Completely." Another pilot voice, hollow, added, "They aren't just soldiers. They're a system, an unstoppable machine." The lesson was clear and bitter. Laughter had no place on this battlefield. Where once they had mocked the Americans, now they feared them, respected them, and understood the magnitude of what they faced. The Americans, meanwhile, moved forward efficiently. Sherman crews performed quick maintenance on the damaged tanks. Infantry reorganized and artillery recalibrated for the next engagement. There was no celebration, only preparation. Victory was measured not in dramatic triumph, but in persistence, precision, and unbroken momentum. The German pilots' confidence had been shattered, but the Americans' dominance only grew stronger with each engagement. As dawn broke, Keller looked down at the fields, now scarred with craters and twisted hedgerows. The Sherman columns advanced steadily, unflinching. Smoke from previous explosions lingered. Yet the Americans pressed forward, undeterred. Keller realized that this was a new kind of warfare, one where scale, coordination, and innovation mattered more than individual skill or courage. The Sherman tanks, once mocked as tin cans, had proven their deadly effectiveness, not just as weapons but as symbols of an unstoppable military philosophy. By noon, German morale was at its lowest point in months. Pilots who had flown with arrogance and derision now spoke in muted tones. Each engagement reinforced the same truth. America's military was not to be underestimated, mocked, or feared lightly. It was an integrated, adaptive force, backed by industrial might and strategic foresight. And the laughter that had greeted the sight of Sherman tanks days ago had long vanished, replaced by a hard-earned respect and a growing dread of the battles still to come. Keller's squadron prepared for the next sortie, knowing that their tactics, experience, and skill would be tested to the utmost limits. Every pilot understood now that American superiority was not a matter of chance. It was designed, engineered, and executed with relentless precision. The Sherman's secret firepower had revealed itself not merely as technical advantage but as a force multiplier that shattered assumptions, challenged pride, and redefined the meaning of battlefield dominance. And in that realization, the German pilots learned the cost of mockery, the weight of underestimation, and the true power of America's military. A combination of innovation, coordination, and the unyielding drive to win, no matter the odds. The laughter of the Luftwaffe had been replaced by silence, reflection, and the bitter understanding that the war had entered a new, unrelenting phase, one in which America's supremacy would be felt in every corner of the battlefield. April 15, 1944, Normandy, early dawn. Mist clung stubbornly to the hedgerows, turning the countryside into a phantom battlefield. German pilots, their pride shattered, regrouped for one last coordinated effort to reclaim the air. Messerschmitts lined the makeshift runway, engines growling as the early light touched their fuselages. The Luftwaffe officers barked orders urging precision, planning flanking maneuvers that they hoped would outwit the Americans. Yet beneath the veneer of strategy, fear lingered like a shadow. Yesterday had proven that mocking American forces was folly. Today, survival depended on exploiting weaknesses that were, perhaps, non-existent, Below, Sherman tanks crawled forward along camouflaged tracks, flanked by infantry units moving with mechanical efficiency. Each tank maintained overlapping fields of fire, turrets scanning the sky as radio communications buzzed incessantly. American officers monitored the skirmish, adjusting positions in real time. The synergy between armor, infantry, and artillery seamless and fluid. For the German pilots, the sight was disorienting. Every action met with an anticipatory response. Every maneuver countered before it could gain traction. Hauptmann Fritz Keller led the first dive. His Messerschmitt screamed through the fog, wings slicing the chill air. Tracer rounds flared below as the Shermans shifted in synchronized wedges. Anti-aircraft crews tracked in every vector. Keller targeted a Sherman moving along the edge of a cratered field. He fired, expecting success, but the tank pivoted smoothly, turret swinging to meet him with precise, rapid counterfire. The rounds exploded harmlessly nearby, the crew calm, unmoved by the assault. Keller's stomach knotted. He radioed, voice strained. They anticipate everything. Every move. The Luftwaffe formation tried to adapt, banking sharply, splitting to cover multiple attack angles. Yet the Americans had not only predicted such tactics, they had prepared for them. Infantry coordinated with tank crews via encrypted radio. Artillery adjusted coordinates in real time, and the Shermans advanced with controlled precision. Explosions punctuated the hedgerows, and smoke swirled like phantom fingers across the fields. One German pilot attempted a strafing run on a tank hidden behind an orchard, only to trigger a perfectly timed mine. The blast tore through the earth, sending soil and metal skyward, leaving nothing but a crater. Keller's own wingman spiraled dangerously low, engines smoking from flak damage. He struggled to regain altitude, the Messerschmitt trembling under stress. Keller realized with mounting horror that this was no ordinary battle. This was orchestration at a scale and precision he had never encountered. The Sherman's secret firepower was not merely a feature of design. It was amplified by a system, infantry, artillery, logistics, and communication, all moving as one. The Luftwaffe had never faced an enemy like this. The pilots attempted a coordinated nightfall attack, hoping darkness would neutralize American radar and visibility advantages. But the Americans had learned from previous encounters. Searchlights cut through fog, illuminating targets just long enough for Shermans to adjust positions. Anti-aircraft crews unleashed flak in a deadly rhythm. Infantry spotters trained for nocturnal engagement signaled artillery to fire at predicted enemy vectors. Keller watched as another Messerschmitt went down in flames, the pilot ejecting with trembling hands. Silence followed briefly, punctuated by the distant crackle of artillery and the hum of advancing tanks. Above the fields, Keller felt the cumulative weight of failure. Their tactics, experienced and daring, had been anticipated, neutralized and countered at every step. The Sherman tanks moved with an almost sentient coordination, each one supporting the other, covering blind spots, and responding instantaneously to changing conditions. Every previous assumption about American forces was shattered. Laughter at their supposed inferiority had long disappeared, replaced by terror and awe. By mid-morning, German pilots were forced to retreat. Engines smoked, wings were shredded, and pride was irreparably wounded. Keller radioed the remaining pilots, voice grim, "Fall back. We cannot engage them on their terms." On the ground, Americans observed with calm efficiency. Tanks moved forward. Infantry advanced, artillery adjusted, and the battlefield was reorganized with rapid mechanical precision. The Germans' confidence had been broken, but the Americans' dominance was growing with each passing hour. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was profound. What had begun as mockery and overconfidence had transformed into fear, disbelief, and in fact, the Sherman secret was no longer merely technological. It was tactical, strategic, and systemic. Keller reflected on the days of laughter at the tank's perceived simplicity. Now every move of the Sherman, every synchronized countermeasure, felt like a lesson in humility delivered in steel and fire. As the sun climbed higher, Keller and the surviving pilots observed the Americans. Logistics trucks trundled across roads, resupplying infantry and armor with speed and efficiency that defied expectation. Recon planes scouted ahead, communicating positions and threats in real time. Each Sherman crew operated as a cohesive unit, their precision and discipline magnified by years of industrial preparation. Keller realized the Americans' true superiority. They had transformed quantity into quality, preparation into battlefield inevitability, and industrial might into tactical genius. By evening, the German squadron had retreated entirely. Engines limping, morale shattered. The hedgerows were scarred, fields cratered, and the smoke of battle hung low in the air. The Sherman tanks remained, advancing steadily, unbroken, and undeterred. Every surviving German pilot knew the same truth, underestimating America's military was no longer a possibility. The laughter of days past had been replaced by fear, respect, and the knowledge that the Sherman's secret firepower was only one facet of a comprehensive, unstoppable system. Keller lay awake in his bunk that night, listening to the hum of engines and the distant crackle of artillery. The cost of arrogance weighed heavily. The Americans had demonstrated superiority not just in design or technology, but in coordination, adaptation, and relentless execution. Sherman tanks, once mocked as slow and vulnerable, had revealed themselves as symbols of an unbreakable military philosophy. The Germans had laughed. Now they understood. The day closed over Normandy in silence, punctuated by distant gunfire and the methodical advance of American forces. Keller stared at maps, plotting potential strategies. Yet the lesson remained unavoidable. America's dominance was not an accident. It was engineered, rehearsed, and executed with precision. The Sherman's firepower was lethal, but the system behind it was unstoppable. And as the Germans retreated into the misty hedgerows, they carried with them a bitter awareness. The war had changed. Laughter had no place here, only survival humility. And the relentless inevitability of American military supremacy remained. April 16, 1944, Normandy, midday. The fields of Normandy had become a lattice of destruction. Hedgerows were torn, craters gaped in the earth, and smoke from burning vehicles curled into the sky. German pilots had regrouped once again, driven by desperation and dwindling morale. Messerschmitts lined the airstrip, engines whining, wings dented from previous skirmishes. Their laughter had long vanished, replaced by grim determination and a nervous awareness of what awaited them below. Every sortie brought the same revelation. The Americans were not merely soldiers, they were a system, relentless and precise. Hauptmann Fritz Keller led the first wave. The Messerschmitts climbed, engines shrieking against the crisp air, slicing through the mist with precision. Below, Sherman tanks moved in wedge formations, overlapping fields of fire, coordinating with infantry and artillery as if orchestrated by a single mind. Spotters signaled positions with rapid efficiency. Radio chatter synchronized perfectly with the advancing columns. Keller's stomach nodded. Every move the Luftwaffe made was anticipated, countered, and neutralized before it could reach its target. The pilots attempted a coordinated assault, flanking from multiple directions. They hoped that by dividing their forces, they could exploit weaknesses in the American lines. But the Americans had prepared for this. Sherman turrets pivoted instantly. Anti-aircraft fire converged, and artillery pounded predicted approach paths. Explosions shattered hedgerows, sending earth and debris skyward. A wingman was clipped mid-dive, spiraling into a crater, engines screaming. Keller's heart raced. He had never seen soldiers move and react with such precision and coordination. The Sherman crews advanced calmly, their movements disciplined and precise. Each tank supported the next, covering blind spots and anticipating enemy attacks. Infantry coordinated with armor, adjusting formations to protect both themselves and the advancing vehicles. Every shot fired by the Germans was met with a calculated countermeasure. Every attempt at flanking or evasion was predicted and neutralized. Keller's squadron began to fracture, pilots pulling back to avoid catastrophic losses. The battlefield, once a playground for Luftwaffe confidence, had become an unforgiving maze of American preparation. Below, Lieutenant Colonel Matthews observed through binoculars, calculating each German maneuver. He relayed precise instructions to Sherman crews and artillery units. Adjust 3 degrees left. Flank the eastern hedgerow. Maintain overlapping fire. Tanks pivoted smoothly. Turrets rotating to cover approaching aircraft. Artillery fired in synchronized bursts timed to disrupt every dive. Infantry signaled for repositioning, adjusting to protect vulnerable points. The American machine operated flawlessly, a living demonstration of industrial and tactical supremacy. The Luftwaffe attempted a nightfall maneuver, hoping darkness would provide concealment. But the Americans had anticipated nocturnal attacks. Radar detected altitude and vector. Searchlights cut through mist and fog, and anti-aircraft crews delivered deadly precision fire. Keller watched in disbelief as a Messerschmitt was shredded by flak, the pilot ejecting into the dark. Tracer rounds crisscrossed the sky like lightning, each one anticipating a pilot's movement before it could be executed. By late afternoon, Keller's squadron was decimated. Engines smoked, wings were shredded, and morale had collapsed entirely. The pilots had entered the day with desperation, but still retained hope. They exited battered, shaken, and humbled. Every tactic they attempted was met with a superior countermeasure. The Sherman tanks had proven themselves not only resilient and deadly but as symbols of American ingenuity and industrial might. The ground, air, and artillery forces moved as one, a machine that no single pilot, regardless of skill, could overcome. Heller radioed the surviving pilots, "Retreat. We cannot win on their terms." On the ground, the Americans continued their advance, methodical, precise, and unbroken. Sherman crews conducted maintenance, repositioned, and prepared for the next phase. Infantry moved fluidly with the tanks, clearing paths and neutralizing threats. Every action reinforced the lesson the Luftwaffe had learned painfully. American forces were unstoppable when coordinated, disciplined, and supported by overwhelming industrial capacity. As evening fell, Keller lay in the dimly lit quarters, staring at maps of the battlefield. He reflected on the past days, the mocking laughter, the overconfidence, and the repeated failures. America's military had not relied on arrogance or surprise. It relied on preparation, integration, and relentless execution. The Sherman tanks, once the object of ridicule, had revealed the truth of American dominance. Technology, strategy, and sheer scale could combine into a force impossible to defeat in conventional terms. The psychological impact on the German pilots was profound. What had begun as mockery had transformed into fear, awe, and bitter respect. The American Army, its tanks, artillery, and infantry, had demonstrated a philosophy of warfare that transcended skill or bravery. It was industrial power translated into tactical supremacy, executed with precision and consistency. The Luftwaffe had laughed at Sherman tanks, yet now the memory of that laughter was bitter and hollow, replaced by the sobering reality of defeat. By midnight, Normandy lay in tense quiet. Smoke from destroyed vehicles lingered, and the distant hum of engines marked continued American advancement. Keller realized that every engagement had reinforced a fundamental truth. The Sherman's secret firepower was only a part of a larger system, a machine of war that could absorb attacks, adapt, and continue its relentless push. The Americans had engineered not just tanks, but victory itself, turning preparation and coordination into a force as unstoppable as steel. Keller's reflection extended beyond personal humiliation. He understood that America's supremacy was not accidental. It was deliberate, structured, and executed with foresight. The laughter of German pilots at the sight of Sherman tanks had been the first miscalculation. The underestimation of American industrial, tactical, and technological might was the second. The cumulative effect had been devastating, transforming confidence into fear and pride into bitter respect. The American superiority had been proven not in a single moment, but in the relentless consistency of action, in the seamless integration of men, machines, and strategy.